You may have noticed it's been a tough time for the Jews. Well, when hasn't it been? Something like the previous 40 years, especially for American Jews. But now, with all of Israel's military incursions and the low simmering anti Semitism that is always present in the world, it is a very tough time for many Jewish people in America and abroad. Eric Fingerhut is a former member of Congress from Ohio. He is the CEO of the Jewish Federation of North America, and I want to talk to him about his efforts, the U.S. government's efforts, and what is the distinction between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism, how to think about that. Eric Fingerhut, welcome to The Gist.
Mike, thanks for having me.
So let's start talking about the congressional actions, or at least expressions of disapproval. There were joint resolutions of disapproval, and Bernie Sanders and I think 17 other Democratic, or in the case of Sanders himself and one other independent senators, voted for what?
Well, there were three different resolutions, but the gist of it is, Mike, that they were, trying to withhold weapons that have already been approved by Congress to be sent to Israel to use in its effort to defend itself and defeat these terrorist organizations that have attacked it from both the south and the north.
Now, they make the distinction, the people who voted for the resolutions make the distinction that these were only for offensive weapons, not things like the Iron Dome. Do you think that's an important distinction, a real distinction?
Well, I don't know what offensive means. If by the Iron Dome, I guess is clearly defensive in the sense that somebody's shooting a rocket at you, and this enables you to try to shoot that rocket out of the sky before it kills people or destroys property. But when you then are going to try to disarm or defeat the people who are shooting the rockets at you, does that now all of a sudden become offensive? It's a defensive war. Israel was attacked on October 7th, by Hamas across the southern border, and then the next day, October 8th, Hezbollah started lobbing rockets from the north. So it strikes me as frankly a distortion, of word usage to say that a weapon that's used to go to try to defeat the people who are attacking you is all of a sudden an offensive weapon.
Right. You could dodge, deflect, and hope for the best when it comes to incoming rockets. But were you to go root out the rocket launchers, I guess that falls under offensive. And this is what these 18 senators don't want Israel to do.
Well, I think that's right. And I think that's why they're so out of step. First of all, it's important to say they were 18 out of 100, right? Which after a year and a month or two, right, 13, 14 months of just really, frankly, demonization of Israel, protests against its military response, attacking its political leadership, et cetera, the media, social media, for the fact that only, was it 18 or 19 senators, voted yes on one of these three resolutions, I think it says something good about America, frankly. Now, it doesn't say much. It doesn't say good about them, I don't think, but it says good about America that still, the overwhelming majority of the United States Senate didn't do that. Now, it's also, frankly, I assume we'll get to this, but the fact that it was all in one party is something that we have to take note of. And,
yeah, it's more than a third of the Democratic Party. And I also noted that among them were some consistent anti-war voices who you would not think this was out of character for. But there were a couple of, to me at least, surprises on that list. Dick Durbin, Tim Kaine, John Ossoff, who is up for re-election in Georgia and is Jewish. If there were a few other Jewish members who voted for that, like Sanders, Brian Schatz, analyze that. Does any specific ones on that list bother you or are more cause for alarm than others?
Well, I guess I wasn't as surprised. I mean, the names you mentioned, are pretty much on the left, the left of the party. As compared to the sort of centrist Democrats, the moderate Democrats that we're used to. So I'm not sure I was so surprised. You mentioned John Ossoff. I think that's going to be the interesting test case, Mike, because he is up for election. Georgia is a more conservative state, and the fact is that we have a very large and significant Jewish community in Georgia, growing Jewish community in Atlanta and environs, and of course the non-Jewish community also believes in supporting America's allies, which includes Israel. So I'm going to be very curious to see how that plays out. And I would not be surprised if it turns out to be a serious issue in his campaign.
Do you talk to the senators or their staff and get the sense, I don't know, maybe some of them, and you were in Congress, say to you, look, it's just a messaging bill, or I have to do it to keep in good stead with my party? I don't know, maybe some assure you that if this was the final call on if they'd actually arm Israel, there wouldn't be that vote. How much contact do you have with the decision making?
Well, I have a decent amount of contact. I think and their staff. I think that I'm a big believer that you gotta assume that people are voting their conscience. Unless you have absolutely compelling evidence to suggest that they're just making a political calculation. I as a former elected official, not just Congress, I was in the state legislature, served in other in other positions. I think that I always wanted people to take me at my word that I was doing what I thought was the right thing to do, and so I'm both convinced and concerned, right, that these senators actually do believe that that they were doing the right thing by making this statement. I couldn't disagree with them more. I think the American public disagrees with them. I think that history is going to prove them wrong. But I think this was a vote of where they fall ideologically, and in that sense, back to my point about how it fell on the left wing of just one party. I think you get to see the political spectrum, right, of America. And the nice thing is, again, it's both reassuring that it was only 18 out of 100, and it was all on one side, of the ideological spectrum, and it's also should be concerning to us that the left wing of the Democratic Party has uniformly adopted this position that I think is so wrong.
On the other hand, you could make the case that probably 18% of America agrees with them. So if we had a Senate that was entirely unrepresentative of the people, that wouldn't be a good
No,
thing.
that's a fair point. Again, I think that what you see is that it's on one part of the ideological spectrum of American politics, and that both, again, as I said, it's both kind of reassuring in a sense that it's not that the vast majority of America in their political ideology and perspectives disagrees with this, and it disturbs me that those who consider themselves the most progressive in their politics have adopted what appears to me to be an alliance with the most anti-progressive forces in the world today. Forces that are not only committing horrific atrocities, they're holding hostages, for God's sakes, women and children in tunnels for over a year, and we know about all the sexual violence and all the other things that have occurred. And yet that's who they're standing with, and I find that very hard to square with what they claim their values to be.
I think that you could make an argument that certain kind of weapons are just so inherently indiscriminate that the United States does not want Israel using them, 2,000-pound bombs and so forth. And the Biden administration did restrict use of those weapons. Did your organization come out against that?
Well, we definitely spoke to the White House, and I did personally, with great concern about that.
And was it, just to interrupt, was it specifically you have to let Israel use all the munitions they want, or was it more a fear of this is the first step in denying actually necessary and useful weapons?
I think it was more the former, Mike. I think that it's really a question of trust, right? Look, Israel is without any question one of America's most strategic, consistent, important allies in the world, militarily, in terms of intelligence sharing. Try to imagine America in the Middle East without Israel right now. Defending freedom and the Western values in the Middle East. They share intelligence. It's impossible to describe how closely entwined the military cooperation is. So at that level of trust and alliance, and by the way, the President Biden, and I give him such credit for this, went to Congress and asked for $17 billion in arms, right? And insisted on that vote. He got the vote. Then to turn around and say, but we don't trust you on how to use this particular one weapon. I just don't get it. Why wouldn't we say, first of all, deal with it privately? We trust you as an ally. We trust you as military, professionals. And if there's a particular unique need for this, we may be worried about it, we may be concerned about it, but we're going to trust our ally. That's what I would want them to do.
But does that necessarily do Israel favors? I personally do not full out trust any administration, and the Netanyahu administration certainly falls under that rubric. And maybe you can't say so, but I've really not ever spoken to even the most ardent supporters of Israel who acknowledge that every political actor is imperfect. And as we've seen from his history, Netanyahu is certainly within that category. So my question is, does it do Israel favors if the United States says, no matter what you do, you're doing a good job? I'm not only thinking of a type of weapon, but as you know, the ICC issued these warrants for the arrests of Gallant and Netanyahu. And and maybe this wouldn't have happened otherwise, but Israel didn't set up its own commission to investigate possible war crimes. Had they done that, you're right. I'm anticipating that you'll be right. Maybe they would have ordered the warrants anyway. But if you're the United States, and we're in the United States, and you have sway over the policies of the United States, should you be saying everything you do is perfect and you're doing it right? Or should you be saying and using whatever levers of suasion you have to say, we trust you, but in these instances, we really feel that it's in your interest to do things this way rather than the way you're doing them?
Look, it's a really fair question. So, but I gotta take it apart because you put a lot in there.
Yeah.
Right. So start with, of course, I don't agree with the Netanyahu government or trust them on everything. We were deeply disturbed by the judicial reform, package that came prior to October 7th. We spoke out on that. I disagree with them on not having a commission of inquiry. And I don't personally feel that I have enough expertise, but we know we've spoken to many of the top military officials, including Gallant and Gantz and a few others, who think they should have done a deal, on a ceasefire, a second ceasefire in Gaza.
Those two guys don't trust the Netanyahu government, or at least they reveal so after leaving it.
So let's be clear. We don't trust them. I was referring to a very specific thing, which is the idea that you don't trust your closest military ally with the use of a particular weapon because you don't think they're going to use that weapon in an appropriate way. That I think actually crosses a line that I'm not ready, that I don't agree with, and I don't think should be crossed. But let me come back. They weren't saying we think you should do a commission of inquiry and therefore withholding weapons until you do that, or we think you should agree to a certain deal that's on the table or withholding weapons that you do that. They weren't using the influence to change a policy. They were simply saying we don't trust, we don't want to see this weapon used by your military in this war, which we've already discussed about, how it's going after. So I was disagreeing with that specific, type of issue. Now, I don't think they should be, I think that it's in America's best interest to support Israel in its military efforts. I think they've shown their military efforts to be carefully designed, well-reasoned. So I don't think they should be leveraging, in any of those examples that even I gave. I don't think they should be doing that. But that doesn't mean you trust them on everything. The best thing in this case would be to let them succeed in dismantling Hamas. Look, we're speaking. I don't know when this is going to be played, but we're speaking. Less than 24 hours after the ceasefire, that was negotiated. And clearly, here's a case where, the the United States put diplomatic efforts into ceasefires with Hamas that went nowhere, but they put diplomatic efforts into the ceasefire with Hezbollah, and it did bear fruit, and it bore fruit because clearly both sides were at a point where they felt that this was that this was something that was good for their good for their country or good for their for their side of the fight. So I think they have every right to delve into these things and try to urge and push and and negotiate. But I think that you make a mistake when you if given how close we are militarily and intelligence wise and everything, if we really have serious doubts about what they're doing, then that's a bigger problem. And I don't think they do. I think they actually are closely aligned, as we saw in the fight against, in response to the Iran missiles, and and a variety of things. And even I know, Mike, I'm speaking a long time on this issue, but I mean, that the U.S. expressed reservations about Rafah, and it turns out that their concerns were not. We're not well placed. So you got to trust the people on the ground militarily.
Okay, here's my last question, which is, I know the scenario whereby Israel loses legitimacy and in a decade they're either crumbling or a total pariah state in the world's eyes, right? Give me the opposite scenario. In a decade's time, how does Israel, it's never going to be loved by all, but how does Israel get more credence and credibility and a better standing in the eyes of its neighbor, the broader world, maybe not everyone on a college campus, but many of the left in America?
So, if you would stop before the college campus, I had a great answer for you. Look, I think you're already seeing that. First of all, Israel was gaining that legitimacy before October 7th. Again, think about the Abraham Accords. And I mean, I was at the White House when the Abraham Accords were signed, and that night got on a plane and went to Abu Dhabi, went to Dubai, and celebrated Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, openly in Dubai, reading from a Torah, the scroll of the 5 books of Moses that had been inscribed for and donated to Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the head of the UAE. So I saw firsthand, and I know that Israel's strength and credibility was growing. I think that that is going to resume. That the defeat of Hamas, the defeat of Iran's proxies and Hamas and Hezbollah is going to be a setback for Iran and is going to increase Israel's reach and partnership with with the major countries of the region. I think America, the political system in America. I mean, look, let's be honest about the results of this election. We spoke earlier about the vote in the Senate. The votes that were on that opposed the amendments, that we discussed earlier in this podcast, are now going to be in the majority, right? They're being enhanced as of January 3rd. There'll be more of them, right? And they're going to be in the majority. And they retain the majority in the House. And so I think I think that scenario is easy to paint. Look, I think college campuses are a very serious problem. I don't. I think it's going to take a long time to turn it around. It's a small number, but it's in these elite campuses where these people, the graduates, are overwhelmingly overrepresented in the halls of government and in media and certainly in academia. And I think that's a longer challenge that we're going to have to fight. So I don't have a good answer for you on that. But on the others, I think there's a very, very easy plausible scenario for Israel emerging from this strong.
So I didn't do the bait and switch, but you mentioned something I have to ask again. All the votes in the Senate came from Republicans to oppose that resolution. The Republican Party does certainly seem foursquare behind Israel more than some elements of the Democratic Party. However, the Trump coalition includes a lot of prominent voices, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others who are not even household names, but kind of prominent, who are anti-Semitic, I would say. Does that worry you and bother you?
Look, I think that we have to be vigilant on both sides. And by the way, I'm not giving up on the Democratic Party. You mentioned I was a member of Congress. I was part of the Democratic Leadership Council, the Bill Clinton era, that pushed back against the last time the Democratic Party went too far left. Right. I hope that happens again. I'm still a Democrat. I'm active. I want to be. I mean, I'm not active because of my job today, but I want to be. I want to see it succeed. And the Republican Party has to watch its flank too. I think the Democratic Party didn't do a good job of watching its flank. We succeed. The Israel alliance, the U.S.-Israel alliance, depends on bipartisan support. It always has. This Congress, it's going to change back again. Look how many times it's changed both sides. 2 years ago, you had the exact opposite configuration, right? You had a Democratic White House, a Democratic Senate. I mean, it's going to change. We know it's going to change. We have to be prepared for both. Both sides have to be on the lookout.
Eric Fingerhut is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. He served as president and CEO of Hillel International. He was a elected representative, a congressman from Ohio. And in case you're wondering, yes, Fingerhut is Yiddish or possibly German for thimble, finger hut or house.
Right.
There you
right.
go.
They were tailors.
The tailors, like Muddle, the tailor. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be with you.